All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started with some introductions. So Pro.com is a residential construction estimation company. For the last few years, we've built up this expert estimation team that has priced thousands of projects across the West Coast from Seattle to down in Silicon Valley. Today, you'll meet a few of the folks behind our pricing engine. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark Page, who's our lead estimator at Pro.com. As a former general contractor himself, Mark brings over 20 years of firsthand experience and really deep knowledge in the home construction space. And as a member of our estimation team, Mark has played a big role in quoting over $1 billion in project line items in his time at Pro. At a macro level, Mark's goal is really just to bring greater pricing transparency when it comes to the world of construction estimation. I'm also joined with Tyler Hegel. Tyler is a project consultant at Pro, and he works one-on-one with architects, helping them translate their designs into easy to compare estimates and helping clients find the right GCs for their projects. And I'm Serena, I'm your moderator. Like I said, if you have any questions today, feel free, drop them in the chat. I'm gonna be keeping tabs on that while our panelists are presenting, and then I'll tee them up at the end. So yeah, I'll circle back at the end of the call. Here's our contact info if y'all have any questions after the presentation as well. All right, so let's dive into today's agenda. So full disclosure, there's a lot of nuance to this topic, right? Our goal today is really just to equip you with the basics so you can feel more confident when it comes to estimates and bids, whether you're working with a new GC or guiding your clients on how to compare offers. We want you to walk away from this feeling like you can help your clients feel confident too. So we'll talk about the estimate, how pricing develops along with the fidelity of your design, how to identify and evaluate different types of contracts that are pretty common among general contractors, especially in California. We'll talk about why GC pricing can just vary so significantly. What are the factors that make some GCs cheaper or more expensive than others? And how does the market fluctuation, what's going on with COVID, how does that all play into this? We'll also talk about general best practices and how to set your clients up for success when it comes time to get bids. And then we'll circle back to Q&A. So let's get started. Hi, Mark.
Hello, thanks, Serena. Thanks for kicking us off. And again, thank you to the AIA Silicon Valley for hosting this webinar, and also everyone that's taken the time to join. We really appreciate it. So this topic really is pretty important right now, and it's kind of top of mind for all of us in the industry. I think all of us are experiencing the recent volatility impacting our projects in one way or another. So it's really important to have this conversation and kind of put it into some terms that we can share with our clients to help provide them with some guidance. I don't know about you, but we're finding our clients more than ever are asking for more help to navigate the bidding process. They're finding it a lot more challenging to find general contractors and to really understand what's driving the pricing of their projects. So let's get into our agenda. Let's take a look kind of at the stages of estimation to start off with. And there's really three stages that we'll talk about here. We've got kind of the schematic stage. So this is really a low fidelity early estimate. The picture's not super clear. We get into design development. We're starting to get a clearer picture of what the cost for the project is going to be, getting closer to that final budget. And then moving into construction, where we're now really establishing the final project budget before breaking ground. So one thing that we've noticed is a complication that comes up throughout the entire life cycle of competitive bidding. We start to see it here. And that's that every GC kind of has their own formatting and terminology and requirements for the way they produce different estimate types. And it's not always easy to tell what you have. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take these three generic stages of estimation, and we'll talk about the characteristics, the fidelity and purpose of those, and really what the general requirements are for the different estimate types, so that you can help guide the client to get the right estimate at the right time, and also to really understand what it is they're looking at. So to do that, let's get started with talking about this schematic design stage. So this is going to be a low fidelity estimate of potential project cost. So the idea for this estimate is to help a client make a go, no-go decision on a design concept. does this project overall heading in the right direction for my budget? The fidelity, we're probably looking at, a low fidelity, like I said, 15 to 25% margin of error. And the more complex a project is, it's going to have less fidelity than a less complex project. You can think of, a new home construction on a nearly vertical lot, or a, 400 square foot addition on a flat lot in a neighborhood. And what these estimates are usually based on is mostly kind of grand things. So we're thinking of square footage, project complexity, and what the square footage is made up of. Things like how many bathrooms, or is there a large kitchen involved, that sort of thing. So there's not a lot of fine details that are used to create this estimate, but this comes into really be an effective tool for value engineering on a grand scale. So we can talk about things like, how does reducing the square footage impact my budget? Or, what if we only do one bathroom in the addition instead of two? Where it falls down is granular cost. So it's not a great tool for defining, if we reduce windows from 11 to 10, or if we change from hardwood to carpet in the bedrooms, how does that impact our budget? It can take some of that into account, but it's not a great product for really getting down into the minute details. And for requirements, really, we're looking to have basic layout plans. Some elevations are helpful. Some site information is helpful, pictures to kind of impact the complexity of the project. But overall, it's a pretty early stage estimate. The next one we'll look at, we're starting to get a clearer picture now, and this is during the design development stage. So this is going to be a higher fidelity estimate of actual project cost. And the purpose here is to help begin to finalize the project budget. And ultimately, really, this is a great time to make a GC selection. For fidelity, we're probably talking about a range of 10 to 15% margin of error. And the fidelity is going to be directly impacted by how comprehensive the plans are at the time of estimation. And also the complexity of the project does come into play again. This estimate is going to be based on a lot more information to inform the cost. Usually the estimator or contractor is going to do a construction takeoff at this point and divide the project up into different trades and stages to start putting individual budgets for each of those. And often at this time, they'll contact key subcontractors and vendors. Usually they won't necessarily contact all their subcontractors or all their vendors, but they'll reach out to ones where have the most risk or the most complexity for a given project. This is when we'll usually start to see allowances come into play, and those will get used for things that are non-defined, maybe the finish items. So they'll use allowances for flooring and cabinetry and countertops, things like that. And this is also where now we're able to get more granular with a value engineering. So this is when those conversations about what if we switch from hardwood to carpet, or from tile to LVP, or things like that. That's really when those can start to come into play and really have a big impact towards defining the final project budget. For requirements, really, it's a full plan set at this point. Some things, though, that aren't necessarily required is we don't need material selections completed. What is really helpful, though, is a general sense of what the client expects. So we're not looking to find out that they want this particular brand countertop in the kitchen. But what is helpful is if we know that they want a solid surface material that's a better than builder's grade. That sort of general direction is really helpful to establish the proper allowances to set the project up for success. Another thing that's often not available at this point would be your MEP plans. It's helpful if they are available to reduce the uncertainty, But a lot of times we'll see contractors list these as design build, and they'll kind of complete the design and the costing of those during the next stage, which is part of their planning process. So let's talk about the next stage, the construction design stage now. And so now this is going to be the final estimate your customer gets before their project breaks ground. And what we're doing here is really establishing that final project budget and setting the definitions for the construction contract. Now, usually this is part of the general contractor's planning process. So usually this estimate is done after a GC has been selected. Usually the general contractors aren't really interested in putting in all that planning energy before they've been awarded the project. There's still a margin of error here, usually 5 to 10%, and that's going to be due to unknown or undiscovered items, potentially some client changes that always come along the way. So that's something to really keep in mind, that even though this is the final estimate before breaking ground, it's not always the last number or the out the door price that the client ends up paying. And this estimate now is going to be based on all the available information. So ideally, at this point, material selections are pretty well defined. We do still see a lot of cases where they aren't fully defined, and they'll still have allowances incorporated to cover those items. But we should really, at this point, have a good sense of what they're going to be, at least directionally. And ideally, a majority of them have been sorted out by now. The general contractor at this point is going to be working directly with most, if not all, their subcontractors and vendors that are going to perform on the project. And they're really trying to determine their project budget and provide that for the client as well. As far as requirements, we're looking now at a set of plans that's ready to submit for permit approval. And a lot of times we find, and it's really a good way to go about it, is that this estimate is done either in conjunction with the permit approval and review process or afterwards. And that's really great because it helps capture any additional requirements that the city wants to add into the project. It's important to note here, and I think it's really something that, a lot of first-time remodeling, clients who are remodeling or building don't really realize, is that there's still going to be some unknowns here or some undiscovered items. And so the general contractors will often manage these by the use of allowances, as we all know, or exclusions, or recommend a contingency fund. And so it's really important that the clients are aware that that's a possibility when they're going into their project. Let's talk a little bit about some challenges here when comparing estimates. As we said before, really there's no standardization in the industry in reality around what terms GCs use for their estimate types. It's often difficult really to identify what type of estimate you're looking at. The GC may have broken down all their cost and done their bid presentation, and another GC might have just kind of looked at the square footage and what the project is composed of and put their numbers together. And the presentations oftentimes can look pretty similar. So it's really difficult to understand exactly what it is that you're looking at as a consumer. Another challenge is that there's not great clarity on the fidelity. So, is this general contractor assuming that there's still a lot unknown at this stage, or has he done, a really deep dive, talked to all his trade contractors, and really, sharpened his pencil at this point for the project? So that's some of the challenges. Some other things that really we see across this whole process of, engaging general contractors, that's challenges the formatting. We find that it varies really widely from one GC to another. So again, it's difficult to understand what type of estimate you're looking at. It's difficult to compare one estimate to another in many cases. And even it can also be a challenge. I'm sure we're all familiar with this, where it's difficult to determine if the estimates include all the same things. So there's some things to really look out for that can be challenges in comparing estimates. And then let's go on to this. We just want to touch briefly on contracts. We know this is something that architects tend to be pretty familiar with. But the reason we want to bring this up is that when you combine the challenge of kind of comparing general contractor estimates, and now you add in the different contract types they might use, it can really further complicate the selection process for an owner, especially if it's their first project. And the other reason this is pretty topical right now is we're seeing a lot of contractors kind of change the types of contracts they use and also incorporate aspects of different contracts together. And the reason they're doing that is because some of the volatility in the market right now. So it's sort of good to do a little refresher here and to kind of look out for certain things and help our clients do the same. So let's just kind of talk briefly about a couple of pretty typical contract types we see and kind of how they're made up. So the first we'll look at is kind of the fixed price or lump sum contract. And this is kind of your most standard or basic contract where you're going to have one price for the entire project. It works really well for smaller projects, and it works really well when the scope of work is well defined and unlikely to change. As far as pros, it's a nice, simple, understandable contract. And it's good for owners that are really concerned about knowing what the end budget is going to be. For cons, it can be a little bit difficult to manage changes in this type of contract. The change orders are usually kind of done in an ad hoc manner. And one problem too that we notice is that there's risk that this is how a GC might kind of try to make up for misses in their estimate is through the change order process. We've all heard that before, and it's definitely a black eye for the industry. So that's some challenges to look out for there. But what we're starting to see a lot more of is elements of the next two, which is time and material contracts and cost plus contracts. So these both are really similar, where in time and material, it establishes a rate for the contractor, either hourly or daily or weekly, and then sets a structure for reimbursement of cost, materials and subcontractor cost. Cost plus is really similar, with the major difference being that instead of that hourly or daily rate, the contractor is going to establish a fixed fee to cover their profit and overhead costs. And we're seeing contractors use elements of these or switch to these types of contracts right now quite a bit due to, like I said, some of the volatility in the market. There are some pros to these. They're really good for owners that are trying to get started really fast and maybe haven't completed all their selection process, or they don't want to go through a 6-month planning process before breaking ground. But the client does have to have some comfort with going into the project without having that final budget set. So there's some budget uncertainty, and a lot of, the client does have to be willing to accept a measure of risk with this. And one thing that we see contractors doing as well, to kind of mitigate that risk and make it a little more palatable for owners, is to incorporate a guaranteed maximum price. It's not really a contract type of its own, although sometimes it can be referred to that way. But we see it often added to either cost plus or time and material contracts to help the client mitigate their risk a little bit or reduce their exposure. So with all that, I think this is what's really interesting is let's talk a little bit about what we can tell our clients, give them some tips for comparing estimates and contracts. So I think, with everything, I think right now, what's super important is to set expectations. So, whether you're working with the general contractor to secure the bids or you're kind of giving your client some guidance, if the GC is aware of what the client's expectations are up front before they put their bid together, about what type of estimate they're asking for, where is the client in their decision-making process? Are they just looking to get that kind of first budget guidance to see if the project is going to fit their budget? Or are they now looking for more of a final price where they're going to select their GC and move into construction? And it's really important to set that expectation so that the contractor produces the right kind of estimate and takes into account the right things. It can be a real challenge to go through the value engineering process when your general contractor's at one stage and your homeowner's at another stage. So it's really important to get alignment there. For the clients, it's really important that they understand some of the factors here that indicate what's practical and what they should expect given the maturity of the plans. That they also shouldn't be going in expecting a really high fidelity estimate if you're only in the schematic stage. So that's some expectations that really help the clients. And then, arm the client with some questions to ask, especially if they're new to this process. Ask the GC what type of estimate they're putting together. Ask the GC about the contract details. What risk am I exposed to here? What's the fidelity of this estimate? A great question is to ask the GC, frankly, how did you calculate this estimate? Did you just look at, the big picture, or did you, dive into all the little details? And that's not, neither one of those are wrong. It just needs to align with the time and stage that the project's at. And then another one is really, that's important, why you want to ask these questions is so that the client understands that it's possible that they're looking at different estimate types from different GCs. So that they may see a price that looks really good, but that estimate could be a kind of a rough number. And they've got another GC that's really done some legwork and looked into all the cost. So understanding that is going to help them be more informed when they go in to make their decision.
Mark, a question we get a lot is like, when is the best time to reach out to get an estimate on your project? And then another one is just like, what is there a contract type that's maybe better that I should ask for or look for when comparing GCs?
Yeah, so as far as when, I think, you probably have all experienced at one time or another a design that has exceeded the client's budget. And it's never a pleasant experience for anybody. So ideally, getting that guidance early on in the process is really important. And as the design matures, we find it really beneficial to continue to update the client's budget so that they're going in through the design process informed of what the outcome is likely to be. And we find some challenges though with that. GCs oftentimes are a little hesitant to give early stage estimates for a couple reasons. They want to protect their credibility. A lot of times we find hesitancy with the GC bidding or providing budget guidance on really early stage plans. So we find that kind of setting that expectation of how that estimate will be used helps alleviate some of that. And the other thing is that GCs are really busy and they don't want to invest a lot of time into a project if there's a low likelihood of winning. So there's some hesitancy there, but it's really important to try to establish relationships with GCs or a source to get that budget guidance. And then for your question about contracts, about which one's better, there's really not one better than the other. They're kind of like different tools in the toolbox. And different contractors use each contract type and even blend aspects of different contract types and successfully, and have great customer experiences. But what's really important is that the client understands how the contract is structured and what it means and what their risks are, and that they're comfortable with that and it makes sense for them and their project. So that's really what we find is important when it comes to contracts.
Thanks. As a reminder, anyone who's just joined us in the last 20 minutes, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. I might bring it up to Mark as he goes through this, or we'll circle back at the end. Just another question that we get a lot is, why does GC pricing vary so significantly?
Yes, that is a big one. So let's talk about that. So, you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you have, been in your office on a Friday and you get a phone call from your client that has finally got their 3 bids. They're all over their client's budget and every one is completely different, right? I think, we've all seen this happen. And so when we kind of think about construction versus some other consumer buying experiences, if we think about what's available today, you're buying a TV or you're buying a car, you're able to really get easy cost information. What should this car cost? Even if you've got your favorite dealer that you have bought several cars from, it's really easy for you to kind of go online, put in the make and model, the options you're interested in, and see if the price that they're offering you on this deal makes sense. And when it comes to a consumer making that kind of purchase, they're not as worried about who they're purchasing from because they're really concerned about the manufacturer's reputation. That's kind of supersede who they purchase from. But when we look at the home building and renovation space, we're building that car in the driveway with an unknown manufacturer. So it's really difficult to be able to compare prices one to another. One of the reasons is that every GC is unique and approaches that project a little bit differently. So we'll kind of talk about kind of 2 reasons that we see pricing vary. And one is going to be kind of just what the industry is inherent to the industry. And the second one are some things that we can do to help establish better bidding. So let's talk about some things that are just kind of part of the industry. Like I said before, each GC is unique. So they approach the project in their own way. They are going to have different relationships with their subcontractors and vendors. Their business makeup is different. You might have a small company with just a couple individuals, and you could have another company that's got offices and trucks and a lot of support staff. And so their overhead is quite a bit different. So we're going to see that each GC really has individual needs when it comes to markup and margin. There's also logistical factors. One that comes into mind is what's the GC's backlog? We've seen instances where, two projects have gone to a GC that are really similar, a few months apart, and one had a really aggressive price and one had a really high price, and they were really similar projects. And the difference is that between the time of the 2 requests, the GC booked several projects, and now he wasn't as motivated to get another project on his backlog. So even one GC's pricing can vary based just on their backlog. So it can be really complicated. Things like the location of the project, is it right where they always work, or is it across town through hard traffic to get to? And another one that I think we often, kind of ignore is that, contractors oftentimes will perform a wide range of projects, and that can be great, but, how is the alignment of fit for the project and the GC? It's okay that GCs handle a wide range of projects, but is this project a competency of theirs, or is it something they do, once every 2 years? So that really needs to come into play as well. So all those factors are sort of things that are just inherent to the industry, and that, there's not a lot we can do about, and we should kind of expect some variation in pricing due to them. But let's talk about some things we can do to help level the playing field a bit. What can we do to help get the most comparable estimates? So number one is in the plans, some simple things really make some big impacts. Things like showing in a renovation or addition, showing the location of a panel, gas meter, HVAC equipment, water heater. Um, you know, decent existing condition drawings go a long way towards helping get a good estimate, a good comparable estimate. Some more information around transition points and how they interact between old and new can be really helpful. And I think the biggest one that we tend to kind of overlook, and I call it kind of like additional work. So throughout the project, the clients oftentimes will decide, as part of this project, we want to paint the entire exterior of the house, or we want to replace all the flooring on the main level. And a lot of times these details aren't really critical to the design process, especially when it comes to the architectural plans. So a lot of times those details aren't included in the plans, and they'll be communicated to the GCs verbally or through a bidding document. But what we find is that when they're not put down on paper in some way, it can be a real challenge where one GC understands that the entire exterior is getting painted and the other GC is only painting the addition, and another GC doesn't know that all the flooring is getting replaced. So getting those kind of details down on paper goes a long way towards getting good comparable estimates. And then kind of specifications and scope of work. We know architects aren't often as part of their package detailing out finishes, but if the finishes aren't detailed, it's really helpful to provide some definition regarding the expectations. So again, we're not looking to define the exact tile selection for a client, but if we know that it is tile, then that goes a long way towards making sure that all the contractors are on the same page as they put together their budgets. And so what we recommend a lot of times is to put together a bidding sheet of some sort, even a simple document that just kind of details out some of that scope of work and just client desires. Even if we've even seen clients put these together really successfully with some guidance, I'm sure, from their architects. But it really helps everyone understand what's going on with the project.
Thanks, Mark. If there's one thing that architects and designers could do to help their clients get better estimates from GCs, what would that be?
Yeah, I think with picking one would be some guidance to all the GCs communicated the same way about finish level. We see all the time where one GC has assumed fixtures from the box store, and another GC is assuming really high-end fixtures from Hansgrohe or something. And so setting some sort of definitions around that for all the GCs to work from goes a long way towards getting us comparable quotes. And I'm going to pick a second one, and that's that, especially in renovations or additions, a simple bid sheet that identifies additional work is really helpful. It can be really challenging to dig through multiple bids and understand what each GC included. And so, you may look at their painting section and it's not really clear if it's the whole house that's included or just the addition or just the renovated spaces. So, providing that kind of simple document to kind of set some expectations around all those really helps us reduce the differences in pricing. We'll still have those pricing fluctuations that are just due to the makeup of the construction business, but at least now hopefully we're going to be looking at more of a baseline where everyone's working off the same scope.
Thanks, that's good advice. I know one thing that's on a lot of people's minds lately is just what is causing these skyrocketing prices in construction across the board right now. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. You don't even have to be in the industry or looking at building a project to have heard this buzz. It's all over the media. Construction costs and material costs are being widely reported on. and we're seeing lots of impacts there. So let's look at a few. And we're not going to solve anything here today, but what we can talk about is how we communicate this to our clients. We don't want to scare them off, but it's really important that they go in with their eyes wide open and kind of understand what's affecting the industry. So let's talk about materials. We'll talk about several points, but let's start with materials. So short and sweet, materials are at historic highs. Really across the board, we've seen significant jumps in material cost. The one that's most notable and kind of gets the most attention is lumber. And really, this has been sort of building up over the last few years. And there's been a lot of impacts from natural disasters, an increase in demand. There's been import duties that have impacted costs, and transportation increases have impacted our cost. But now we kind of get into a situation with COVID where we're starting with this already historic high lumber pricing, and then it's just spiked over the last 12 months, depending on which report you look at and what day it is, somewhere between 200 and 300%. So it's really pretty significant. And with the cost impact, when we look at, we see a lot of things published for cost impacts, talking about a range, of a typical house with the $25,000 to $30,000 impact just on the framing package. And we're seeing examples even higher than that, approaching $50,000 in reality. So it's quite an impact, and it's something that everyone needs to be aware of. Just so, like I said, going in kind of with their eyes open to the situation currently. Other materials have really elevated along with lumber at a lesser rate, but still pretty unprecedented increases. We're seeing big hits in steel, copper, concrete, roofing, and the latest one I'm starting to see pretty significant is in our manufactured materials. So things like our windows and doors and cabinetry, they're really starting to take a hit as well. And it's really due to similar reasons, with just the rising cost and demand of everything is causing that spike. The next one, obviously, is the COVID impacts. And when we think about this, we're often kind of focusing on the material cost, right? So we're thinking of things like that lumber package and like our windows and doors going up and our cabinetry. But there's really some other costs that are really felt by the GCs, and those are things like procurement. Materials are harder to get right now. So we think back 2 years ago, and the GC was going to build a house. They called their lumber guy, their favorite one, and material is going to be delivered in a couple of weeks, no problem. But now it's more like you call your favorite lumber yard, and they have half of what you need, and the other half isn't going to be around for quite a bit, or their price is just so out of sight that you need to shop around and really do a lot more legwork to handle your procurement process. The other things too that come into play are the safety requirements. A lot of places are putting restrictions on how many workers can be in a space at a time, requirements around cleaning and personal protection equipment. So all these things are really adding up to increase our time and logistical challenges for projects. The next one is, again, it's something that's been happening for quite some time, is the labor market. So this is an interesting survey where construction firms were surveyed about the trouble of filling trade positions, and 80% were having trouble filling them. And I found this one result really interesting, is that, especially when you consider the volatility of the market, cost increases, material challenges, 72% of GCs that were surveyed anticipated labor shortages would be their biggest hurdle this year. So that to me really indicates how significant this impact is for contractors. We'll touch a little bit on this real estate market and how this impacts. So there's really a shortage of homes on the market, and one economist is got some calculations that there's fewer than 3 months supply of homes on the market, which is the lowest on record. And so this is really creating a demand for new homes. And when we were already kind of in this situation last year, when we had the COVID shutdowns where construction was really shut down pretty significantly. So we already had this supply shortage. And then we really lost the better part of our busiest and most productive building seasons due to shutdowns. So that's really putting us in a situation where we've now got this huge backlog of pent up demand, which is further complicating the material cost. And also it's really filling up GC's schedules so that they're really busy. And anytime you have, demand greater than supply, we're going to see prices increase. So GCs are feeling this. We can look at the next slide here and just talk about kind of what's going on. What does this mean for contractors? So we can see, almost all GCs that have been surveyed are experiencing delays with getting materials and struggling to meet their schedules because of product delays and just the logistics that we're facing. And they're expecting these delays to continue into Q2 and beyond of this year. So, that's something that really needs to be understood by clients as an impact. GCs are putting in higher bids on projects is definitely something we're seeing a lot of. And another one that's really interesting is this last one where, a significant number of GCs are beginning to turn down work because of several reasons. Their backlog is too great. They're trying to really focus on projects with less risk to them. So that's another pretty significant impact that is kind of the outcome of all these things.
Mark, can you comment on what you've seen specifically in these markets?
Yeah, we've seen several things that are pretty interesting. On the architect side, we've seen architects starting to kind of be creative with materials, try to search for alternatives. We did one cost study for an architect where they were, contemplating switching to light gauge steel frame as opposed to a wood frame. And in that one project, it made sense. There's some challenges there, with making sure that there's GC supply that can accommodate the, less common materials. But it's certainly an interesting time to see how architects are responding. For owners, we're seeing a lot of owners start to value engineer their projects more, especially even late in the design stage, trying to get them to come back into budget. We've seen a lot of instances of owners deciding to delay their project, which is unfortunate. And we've seen quite a few phase out their projects. So, something like let's do the addition, but let's not remodel the kitchen at this point. So we're seeing quite a bit of that. On the GC side, I think this is something that's important for us to be aware of and have our clients be aware of, is that we're seeing builders use allowances for things they wouldn't have in the past, like lumber and steel packages. We're seeing allowances used for those, or we're seeing contingency used for those. We're definitely seeing builders increase their prices to account for, not only the material volatility and pricing, but also to account for some of the unknowns that's going on. So kind of for a takeaway, this doesn't look like it's going to change in the short term. It seems like the market is going to stay pretty hot from all the indications that we're seeing with the backlog that the GCs are reporting, the material cost. It seems like they level out only to spike again. So, I think it's just really important that clients are aware of all this as we're going into planning a project.
Thanks. On that note, what would you recommend that architects do to help their clients amid all of this chaos?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. Some of this has kind of always been around, and it's nothing super unique to the time, but it seems like it's a little bit compounded more than ever. And it seems like these current market conditions are making the clients, at least from our experience, really looking for more and more guidance than they ever have before. So let's talk about some tips of what can we do. I think number one is just communication. Clients really should be aware of the challenges that the construction industry is going through right now. And I think that helps set them up where they have a better expectation of what's going on. The other thing to help them with understand is that the addition that their sister-in-law did a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, it's not the same budget they can expect right now. The costs have just really increased pretty significantly. So just going in with that mindset, I think, is really important. Again, we have to strike a balance where we don't want to scare our clients off, but we do want to prepare them for the challenges that are going on in the industry. I think some guidance, it's just best practice all the time, but it's just become even more important, is to kind of help clients with their GC selection when they're looking at who to bid. And this is like its own entire webinar probably, but simply, we don't want, we want to focus on the GC's core competencies. So we don't want a kitchen remodeler bidding on a new home construction. Even if they're capable of doing it, is this the type of project they do day in and day out? Did they do one a few months ago? Are they aware of all the current challenges going on? It's really important right now more than ever. We're finding clients also really looking for that early pricing guidance and ongoing pricing guidance as their plans mature. Again, with communication, a lot of clients, they don't know the right questions to ask general contractors about their bids and their contracts. So, having some information we can suggest to clients to kind of ask the right questions can really help them. And back to kind of the bidding process, providing some, whether the architect works on it or the client works on it or a combination, to provide some specifications around expectations around finish levels, additional work, that goes a real long way towards making it a smooth process. And we're finding too right now, especially when the prices are kind of outside of clients' expectations, a lot of times that they're looking for a lot of help with reviewing bids just to understand what it is they're looking at. So that's something else to keep in mind too. So to be aware that the clients are needing a little more hand-holding than maybe they did a year or two ago.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate all the advice, and I'm sure the folks on the call do too. So like Mark said, there are definitely a few ways that architects can help their clients make more informed choices when it comes to comparing estimates. But there's no denying that it takes time to do that work, right? We found that architects who offer that level of service might spend anywhere between 10 to 20 hours or more per client. That's time spent reaching out to GCs, analyzing line items on specific bids, or trying to get line item pricing on specific bids to make sure that they're actually comparable. So that's where Pro.com comes in, right? Instead of reaching out to GCs at different points throughout your project, we have a service called the benchmark quote that is kind of like having that estimation expert on standby. So whether you need that early stage pricing guidance or you want to help your clients compare bids, we can be that resource for you. So before we get into Q&A, and as a reminder, feel free to drop in the chat, or I'll turn things over and you guys can chime in just a minute. I'm going to hand things off to Tyler. Hi, Tyler.
Hey, thanks, Serena. Let me grab my screen here real quick.
Perfect.
All right. So here's a project we can use as an example to quickly see how benchmark quotes works. So this architect's client, Clara, came to us because they were having a hard time getting meaningful quotes from contractors that were available. The quotes were all ballpark estimates at best, and they weren't really clear on their availability. So the project was a 2-story, 2-bed and 3-bath ADU in her backyard. And like many homeowners, Clara wanted to use it as a flex space and as a rental. So she had finalized her designs and had just submitted for permitting, which is a great time to get quotes. So using the architect's final plans, we fully estimate the project to develop our benchmark price and scope. And the benchmark price is based on thousands of quotes using real-time market data across the board. And our benchmark price is designed to come in around 15% of the average GC bid. So in other words, it's our recommendation of what the project should cost to help anchor the client expectations as they compare GC offers. So after the architect reviewed and approved the scope and the benchmark price, we sent out the package to our contractor network. We sent it out to 5 contractors that we had engaged with, and we felt 3 of those were the best fit for the project based on their experience, availability, and clearest budget. So the GCs include their available start date, the duration of the project, and total price, along with their profile and a note to the homeowner. So each GC bids on the same line item price, scope, or excuse me, the same line item scope, materials, and amounts that are defined by us, Pro, and approved by the architect. Exclusions and allowances are tagged when applicable, along with any notes that the contractor wants to call out. So each GC, after completing their bids, we present that to the homeowner and the architect. And Claire, reviewed each of the quotes, and we scheduled site visits with each of the GCs to see if they'd be a good fit. And in this case, she ended up hiring Courtney Construction because she felt they had the best experience for her project, and along with their good price point. So Claire, you can see, was able to easily compare the bids and make an informed decision using the benchmark quotes tool. So if you have any other questions about how the product works, go ahead and drop them into the chat.
Thanks, Tyler. Stealing the screen back from you. All right. So before we move on to Q&A, I just want to share as a thank you for coming to hear us talk today. We'd like to give everybody on today's call what we call a free budgetary quote. So that's our price range estimate and a scope of work for any project that you're currently working on that you're curious about and would like to get pricing for. Totally free, just to give you an idea of what we can offer. If you'd like to get GC bids for a project that's sort of in the finishing stages, we can offer you a pretty big discount on that pricing as well. So if you're interested or just want some more information, feel free to drop your email in the chat, or I'll send out a link to book a consultation. Again, no obligation, no pressure, just available if you're interested in. All right, so with the time we have left, I'm gonna transition over to Q&A. Feel free to drop in some questions or unmute yourself. One question we got is just how big is our GC pool in the Bay Area? Tyler, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so in the Bay Area, we operate in San Francisco, San Jose, so that kind of general region. We have 30 plus general contractors that we have vetted and are available and part of the program.
Thanks, Tyler.
And we're always adding, oh, what was that?
No, go ahead. I just wanted to mention that we can also bring in any GCs that you currently work with. So if you have someone that you usually like, but you want that detailed line item pricing, we're happy to bring them into the fold.
Yep,
Tyler, we have another question. Yes, thank you. Let's see. What's the typical number of GCs that are bidding on the work? Tyler, do you want to take that one too?
Yeah, so for a project, we tend to engage with 4 to 5 GCs per project. And then out of that group, we get down to about 3. And again, it's just a matter of matchmaking the right GC for the project based on their experience the customer's budget, their availability to start the project, and some other things like that.
Yeah. Mark, is that usually what you'd recommend, like 3 to 5 GCs bidding on a project? Does that give you a good handle on just what like price range might be?
No, we don't want to have that many bid on the project, but what we'll do is, as Tyler was saying, I'll clarify a little bit. We'll engage with maybe 5 GCs early on, kind of explain what the project's all about. And from that list, we'll narrow down to 2 or 3 that are going to provide bids. We want to start with a little more than we end up with, just to kind of see what everyone's schedule is. Does it make sense for the project? Does it match what the client wants? Do they do that type of work? You know, we sort of double check that when we go into the bidding phase. So we'll start with a pool of maybe 5 or even 6, and then we'll get down to 3 solid bidders generally.
Great, thanks for clarifying. We got a couple questions around pricing, so maybe Tyler, you could take this. Questions just around like how much does benchmark quote cost, and then do GCs have to pay to participate with Pro?
Yeah, so for GCs, they pay a 1 to 3% of the total project cost if they are selected for the project, which the homeowner doesn't necessarily have to. And then for the general cost for a benchmark quote, so for a full benchmark quote plus 3, which includes 3 GC quotes, the cost is $500 to either the architect or the homeowner. We have seen both architects and homeowners pay for it independently or split the cost themselves.
Awesome. And another question, can we, so the architect, select the GCs that are invited to bid on the project?
Absolutely, yeah. We have had that happen a number of times, and we love that. It's always great to add more GCs to the program, assuming that they're high quality GCs. And we also know how important it is for a lot of architects. We hear this all the time. They want to work with GCs that they trust and know will do a good job on behalf of their client. And so we want to support that, and we're happy to include GCs into our program.
Thanks. Mark, this might be a good question for you. Where does our pricing data come from, and where are we in terms of how accurate basically are our quotes compared to what we see from GCs later on?
Yeah, so what we kind of draw from several sources, but we've found historically that just out of the box data that you can purchase isn't really reliable, especially right now with all the fluctuations we're seeing. So what we do is we really manage our own cost data, and we review it project by project in reality as new projects go through the system. So we're constantly updating our pricing and trying to really be right in line with the market on a given basis. And I can offer anecdotally over the last couple of months, it's been quite a challenge to stay on top of that. But we find it that overall we're successful, and the picture that we set for the homeowners really helps them get a good expectation of what the project is likely to cost. And we tend to shoot to be within 5 to 10% of the average of GC bidders is kind of our goal. So that's sort of what we aim for.
Mm-hmm. Another question was, do we get feedback on the end cost, or is Pro done after the bid is selected?
Yeah, I'll take that, Mark. So we are officially done. What we want to do, we're officially done when the bid is selected, but what we want to do is give a homeowner, all of the information they need to make an informed decision on hiring the right GC. However, we're always available to help out with homeowners throughout the project to the end. We don't at this time have a formal feedback loop on the end costs. So
yeah, I would just add that if all the work we do up front is to reduce the risk of change orders and big price fluctuations coming down later, so that's sort of what you're getting with us up front. Yeah. Any other questions with chat? I know we're right about at time. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd rather share your voice. All right. Well, we're right about at time. So thank you everybody who joined. Thanks everyone who asked a question. If you're interested in trying out the service, feel free to email us. You can always reach us at benchmark@pro.com. I'll reach out to anyone who dropped their email in the chat. And thank you to Chris and the AIA for letting us share our expertise with you today. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.